Hey, what's up guys? Today we're going to talk about why it's so important to listen to music in your target language. And I have 4 main reasons that I want to share with you to support that argument. But before we get into that, I want to mention that language learners should help each other. And we should be able to bounce ideas off of one another. With that said, I want to encourage you to leave some comments below with the language that you're learning and some songs that you have found useful for learning your target language. And I'm going to do the same. So with that said, let's get into this video. The first reason is that when you learn languages with music, you're naturally using the chunking method. This means that you're learning whole phrases instead of individual words. And this is useful for a number of reasons. First of all, because when you speak a language, you want the words to come out smoothly together rather than one word at a time. Not to mention how sometimes all the individual words of a sentence mean something completely different than what the sentence means with all the words together as a whole. Did you ever think about how when you say, "I could care less," what you actually mean to say is, "I couldn't care less"? Because what you're really trying to communicate is that I don't care at all. When you use the chunking method to language learning, you learn the meaning of the whole phrase, so the individual words aren't going to get in the way and mess you up with your perception of what it means. It's also easier to memorize chunks, which is exactly what we do with phone numbers. We don't just memorize all 10 digits individually. We group them into smaller chunks that are made up of individual numbers, and it's easier to learn that way. My second reason is that learning languages with music makes learning abstract rules a little bit more concrete. Okay, really quick side note for those who are learning English. I want to define the difference between abstract and concrete. Something that's abstract exists in thought or as an idea, but it doesn't have any physical or concrete existence. Something that is described as concrete exists in a material or physical form. It's more tangible than something that's abstract. Now, of course, song lyrics are not truly concrete objects, but you can physically see them on the page or on your computer screen, and it's easier to grasp them than technical grammar rules. And when you do eventually learn the grammar rules, you'll have something to apply them to that you already know and can see. Too often when you learn something new in class, you're just swimming in this sea of abstract concepts that you don't understand. And you're just forced to learn these rules by memorization because they don't actually mean anything to you yet. And music can kind of reverse this process because first, you'll learn the strange way in which people actually speak. And then, when you learn the underlying grammatical rules in class or online or however you're learning, they won't be quite as abstract because you'll have real-world examples that you can relate them to. This has happened to me several times in my French classes over the last few years. For a long time, I had been listening to a song by Zaz in which she said, "Je n'en veux pas." And I understood the phrase "je ne veux pas," but I couldn't understand why she kept adding that little en. That is, until I took a French grammar class in which they explained the French pronouns and how en can actually serve as a pronoun. And then it just clicked. It made sense because I had already had the previous experience with the song. Similarly, this summer when I was in Paris, I was sitting in class, and just kind of in passing while he was speaking about something completely unrelated, my professor just gave us a little tidbit, and he said that in French you have the word quand, which ends with a D, but when it's followed by a word that starts with I, it won't be pronounced as a D, it'll be pronounced as a T. And instantly when he said that, my mind went straight to the song La Vie en Rose, because the very first 2 words of the chorus are quand-ti. And I had noticed this before. I realized that she was pronouncing it more like a T than a D, but I never realized that there was an underlying phonological rule for why she was doing that. And this was just a short tidbit that my professor kind of spontaneously threw out right in the middle of class. And I definitely would have just immediately forgotten it if I didn't already have a familiarity with the song and a real-world example of someone using that rule. And with that being said, it brings me really nicely into my next reason for listening to music, which is it helps you recognize pronunciation patterns or phonological rules. If you want a more in-depth explanation about how these pronunciation rules work, you can check out my video link up here. I did a whole video on the scientific study of phonology and how we can use that information to help us learn pronunciation as language learners. Now before we go any further, I have to do a really quick English lesson for the people who are learning English on my channel. But if you're a language learner, it should still be interesting to you even if you speak English as your native language. In English, when we have a word that ends in T, and it's followed by pretty much any variation of the word you, that T is not pronounced as a T sound, it's pronounced more like a ch sound. And don't ask me why, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but that's just what we do in English. So if you're learning English and you listen to the song Don't You Forget About Me from The Breakfast Club, don't you forget about me, you might listen to that and you might notice and you're saying, why doesn't he say don't you? He says don't you. And then you listen to the Billy Joel song where he says, you have to be a big shot, did you? And then you listen to the Marshall Tucker Band. Can't you see? Oh, can't you see? And after listening to several of these songs, you'll start to put the pieces together, even though you haven't actually explicitly learned the rule. This is another reason why we want to use chunking, because you don't just learn the word don't and you learn them together, and it's don'tcha. Now, it would be easy to over-apply this rule to any instance where you have a T followed by a Y, but then you listen to the Britney Spears song, I'm not a girl, not yet a woman. And you think, that's interesting. She said not yet. She didn't say not yet. So by listening to a wide variety of music, you're going to start to learn when and where to apply these phonological rules. And the fourth, but maybe the main reason that I think you should listen to music in your target language is simply because
it's easy?
Yes, it is easy.
My three main goals for this YouTube channel is to help make language learning fast, fun, and easy. And easy isn't in there by accident. There's a big reason I want to make language learning easy. Because if it's difficult, then we're just not gonna follow through with it. And it's just gonna lead to a lot of frustration and failed attempts at learning languages. So any language learning technique that we can easily implement into our daily lives is worth it just on that basis. When you're listening to music, it doesn't feel like studying. It feels like something fun that you do in your native language anyways. And you can do it all day long without any extra effort on your part. I have Spotify playing in the background all day long in Quebecois French. You may not always be paying close attention to it, but it's better to have more exposure than less exposure, so I still count this as a plus. And listening to music is passive. You don't have to be actively putting all your attention into listening to the music for it to be beneficial. You can be doing other things and just singing along in your head while you do it. Then a lot of times, without even realizing it, you'll be practicing throughout the day because the song is stuck in your head. Now, after listing all the benefits of listening to music, there's also a few cautions that I want to mention. First off is that song lyrics are not always sung naturally in the way that people actually speak. Sometimes when we're singing, we put the emphasis on the wrong syllable. This doesn't happen all the time, but on occasion, songwriters will change the stress of a word in order to help it fit the rhythm of the song better. That's why in the song Dreams by Fleetwood Mac, she sings, "The rain washes you clean." That sounds weird to a native English speaker. It should be, "The rain washes you clean," not washes. This isn't usually a problem because it makes songs sound so awkward that songwriters usually try to avoid doing that. But it's still something to pay attention to while you're listening. On occasion, songwriters will use strange syntax in order to help their songs rhyme better. The one that comes immediately to my mind is the song Maggie May, who I think is sung by Rod Stewart. And it's a good song, but this line sticks out because it's so terrible. He sings, "I laughed at all your jokes, my love, you didn't need to coax." And if you speak English natively, or if you have any basis in English, you know that that's just so wrong. It doesn't sound natural at all. No native speaker of English would ever say that unless you're intentionally trying to change the grammar around to fit it into your rhyme pattern. It should really be, "You didn't need to coax my love," but of course then that wouldn't rhyme with jokes. And of course another thing to look out for is that a lot of times songs are more artistic and more metaphorical than we speak in real life. If you listen to Smells Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana or Mr. Tambourine Man by Bob Dylan, you might get to the very end of the song and still have no idea what they're talking about. It's because they're not as worried about making sure their sentences make sense as they are about just making an enjoyable song, okay? And you really don't want to go around speaking in really flowery, metaphorical speech all the time. Now, all these warnings aren't a huge deal. If you're listening to a song and you hear something weird that you're just not sure if it's right or if it sounds natural, just find a native speaker to ask and they can usually clear it up right away. And if the native speaker doesn't understand what it's saying, that's a pretty good indication that you probably should just avoid saying that thing. And the only other caution I have is don't use listening to music as an excuse to not study actively. If you want to improve your language, you have to dedicate time towards studying. And that doesn't mean just listening to music in the car. You want to dedicate a certain amount of time every day to studying actively with all of your attention. Okay, it's not a substitute just to have music playing in the background. But as long as you acknowledge that music is really a great way of helping to supplement your language learning routine. So thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to give me a thumbs up. I would really appreciate that. And don't forget to leave a comment below with your favorite songs for learning languages. And I guess with that, I'll just say, see you next time.